In this video, I'm going to teach you how to calculate in chess and how to improve your calculation abilities. So let's take a look at this position right here. This is what's called an opposite side castling situation. And in a position like this, what you need to do is you need to start a pawn storm on your opponent's king. So white wants to play moves like g4, h4, h5. Black wants to play moves like b5, b4, and so on. So the first thing that you need to do in order to be good at calculation is that you need to understand the demands of the position. You need to understand what the position requires. Now, in this case, it's to pawn storm on each other's kings. In some other position, it might be different. It might be, okay, slowly improve your position. There might not be an immediate attack in some other positions. But understanding the positions allows you to filter out all of the useless moves. So, for example, why don't we calculate a move like b3, for example? Why don't we calculate a move like a3, for example? Well, a3 is actually not that bad of a move. It's not the best move. Ironically, it's not the worst move either. But okay, b3 is a very poor move. h3 is a very poor move. Why don't we calculate these moves? It's because these moves don't make any sense in the position, and you shouldn't waste any time calculating moves like h3 and b3. So in order to be a good calculator, you need to understand the demands of the position, what's going on in the position, so you can filter out all of the useless moves such as b3, such as h3, such as bishop to d3, let's say, is also not a great move. You need to understand the position in order to get rid of these moves right away. And from there, then you can start calculating all sorts of different lines. You can start calculating h4, b5, h5, b4, what's going on here? Who is attacking who? Whose attack is faster? Now knight to d5, knight d5, ed5, and stuff like this. You need to filter out all of the bad moves in order to understand all of the good moves. And for that, in order to be able to accomplish that, you need to study the positions. You need to understand the positional nuances. So in a way, having strong positional understanding of the game allows you to calculate better because you know what to look for in any given position. So you need to study these types of positions in depth. You need to understand all of the attacking ideas if you have a position like this. You need to understand all the maneuvers and positional ideas if you have a Carlsbad structure, let's say. So first things first, understand the demands of the position, study the position so you know what to look for so you can calculate it better. The next thing you should be aware of is what's called a checklist. So a checklist in chess is checks, captures, and attacks. So first things first, you want to look for all the checks, then you want to look at all the captures, and then you want to look for all the attacks. So let's say in a position like this, we play a move like knight to g4. And let's say white plays this move f3, attacking our knight. Of course, we can just simply retreat the knight to either f6 or h6. And this, it would not be good, but it would be reasonable since, we would not be losing this knight. However, once again, let's look at all of our options. Maybe we don't have to retreat the knight. So let's look at all the checks. It turns out the only check that we have currently is bishop takes d4. That check doesn't really do anything, so we can easily discard that right away. After c takes, pawn takes, there's simply f takes g4, and we don't get anything in this position. So we can quickly determine that bishop takes d4 is not a good move, so we discard all the checks in this position. Now let's look at all the captures. We already looked at bishop takes d4, which it was a check, it was also a capture, but we already looked at that. We determined that that was bad. How about pawn takes d4? This is also a capture. And what is white going to do here? Because if white captures the knight, for example, in this case, we have d takes c3 with a discover check and also an attack on the queen. So what exactly does white do here? Because if white blocks, then we can simply capture, king captures, and we capture on b2. This rook is trapped. We're going to be making a new queen. We're probably going to lose the new queen, but we're going to be winning the rook at least. Actually, we might even promote here because after bishop to d3, we can capture here first. And of course, they don't have to take, but if they do, now we're making a free queen, so a whole new queen. but that's how we're winning in this position. And if we calculate this sequence, if the bishop blocks, for example, we can capture our opponent's queen, they capture our queen, and then we capture on b2, and once again we're picking up the rook momentarily. So we were able to figure all of this out because we used the checklist here. Never make assumptions about a position. Never assume that just because you're getting attacked, you have to retreat. You might have a counter-attacking opportunity, and using the checklist, checks, captures, attacks, really helps with that. It's very useful, especially in longer time controls. In Blitz and Bullet, it's hard because you don't really have enough time to use the checklist. You don't have enough time to scan every position for checks, captures, attacks. But if you are playing longer time controls, let's say you're playing 15 plus 10, in that case, you can use the checklist. You don't have to use it on every move, but you can use it in critical moments, like, okay, I don't know what to do here. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of tension in the position. Let me scan the position for the checks. There's no good checks in this case. Okay, now let me scan the position for all the captures. And as it turns out, this is a fantastic capture that wins the game for the black pieces, since there is no good way to deal with it. If you just simply capture the pawn back, now you have this very, very nice move, knight to e5, using this pin right here, and this knight is coming to c4. So if you want to stop this, you either have to capture this knight right here. In this case, you would be losing this pawn because the pawn is still pinned and there are too many attackers on the pawn on d4. And if you don't capture it, well, then what do you do? Like, do you just go bishop to g3 because knight c4 is coming? And this is just an atrocious position for the white pieces. You're getting severely pressured. There's not much you can do. You can try moves like maybe bishop to d3, but then that allows bishop d4. So there are so many tactical opportunities, so many ways for white to make a mistake here. And all of that happened because we used the checklist at an appropriate moment. So whenever you sort of sense something in a position, whenever you feel like there's a lot of tension in the position, always use the checklist, because sometimes there's going to be some crazy tactical shot just like this one, or there might be a threat of a tactic, right? Because we're threatening to win the queen or win a lot of material. But if our opponent doesn't engage with any of the tactics, if they just simply capture back, now we have a positional threat, which is knight to e5, knight c4, and this is just very, very difficult for white to deal with. Actually, white can't deal with this at all. It is an objectively losing position. So make sure you utilize the checklist. It doesn't have to be on every single move, but you should use it in critical moments. Just scan the position for checks, captures, or attacks. So now let's talk about puzzles briefly. Puzzles are a great way to improve your calculation abilities if you do them correctly. So how do we do them correctly? First and foremost, you don't want to be using arrows. So let's take a look at this position right here. In this case, the best move is queen to h7, king f8, bishop b4, and then black blocks with something, and then queen to h8 is checkmate. Now, the reason why I'm using arrows right now is for a demonstration, but if you're actually trying to solve a puzzle, don't do this at all. What you should be doing instead is this right here. Keep this position in your mind. You can move the mouse away completely and calculate the sequence. So from here, queen to h7, and then the king moves over, then we can give a check on b4, black blocks, and then it's going to be checkmate on the next move with queen h8. So you want to be calculating and you want to be visualizing. I didn't draw arrows there deliberately to show you what that process might look like. Visualization and calculation are essentially, they're not the same thing. I don't want to say that they are exactly the same thing. However, they're very closely related. Chances are, if you are good at calculating, you're going to be good at visualizing as well. And if you're good at visualizing, you're going to be good at calculating as well. So they're not essentially the same thing, but they're very, very much related. And any puzzle can be a calculation exercise. And I will go even further. Any position in chess, no matter how stupid it is, can be turned into a calculation exercise. And even in your games, after you're done playing the game, you're analyzing the game, you can pick out specific moments from that game, and then you can start calculating in your mind without the arrows. Once again, don't use the arrows. And the more you do this, the better you're going to get at it. So there's a fantastic analogy. I believe I heard this from the Hanging Pawns channel, but I've heard some other people make this analogy as well. Calculating and trying to get good at calculation is pretty much the same as like going to the gym, because in order to get good at lifting weights, you need to go to the gym consistently. You need to lift heavy weights, and then once you like adapt to those weights, and then you need to start lifting heavier weights. And calculation is the same way. You start with these sort of easy puzzles and you do them a lot, you fail them a lot. Let's say queen h8 here. This is the wrong move, by the way. This is not the right move. Let's say you play this move because it makes sense. It's a check, right? But the king runs away and you fail this puzzle. But for the next time, now you should try to see this sequence from all the way back in the beginning. And you should do this for your puzzles, you should do this for your games, and the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. There is no magic potion that will make you better at calculation. The only thing that will make you better at calculating is just practice. So practice, 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 and then you will start seeing better moves. You can use the checklist as well. Scan the position for checks, captures, attacks. So let's look at all the checks. Queen g8 and queen h8 don't work. Bishop g7 doesn't work either because the king runs away. And now we have come to the conclusion. We have one more check. We have bishop to b4. And as it turns out, after bishop b4, rook blocks. And now this right here is checkmate. And when you are doing these sorts of puzzles, you should be able to see all of these sequence from far away. Or not should be able to, but you should always try to find this sequence from far away rather than actually doing them like once you make the move. So for example, you don't want to make the move queen h7 and then start looking for a move like bishop b4. You want to see this whole sequence from right here, not after you make this move. You want to see the whole sequence from the very beginning. So calculate as much as possible, visualize as much as possible, and remember that any position can be turned into a calculation exercise, and be very, very consistent also. And if you do all of those, your calculation abilities are certainly going to improve. Next up, what I want to talk about is that whenever you're calculating, instead of trying to prove yourself right, try to prove yourself wrong. So what I mean by that is that, let's say black plays this move, bishop to e6, for example. And in this case, okay, you see that you can take this pawn on b7 right here. And you calculate to yourself, let's say my opponent, if he moves this rook, then I take this pawn. And if my opponent moves this rook, then I take this pawn, and wow, so great. Now I'm in a much better position. However, this is sort of wishful thinking, and instead of proving yourself right, you need to try to prove yourself wrong. So for example, whenever you calculate this sequence out, queen takes b7, instead of looking for ideal resources for yourself, look at resources for your opponent. What is my opponent going to do here? Is he going to attack my queen, or is he going to do something else? And as it turns out, he's not going to attack your queen here. He's going to do something else. He's going to threaten checkmate, and once you defend that checkmate, then he's going to attack your queen, because now if you capture this pawn on a7, he will capture the pawn on b2. Now this is once again another checkmate threat over here. And how do you defend it? Because if you defend it with rook to f2, there's a very simple rook captures, bishop captures, or king captures is even better. But if bishop captures, there's bishop takes f3, and if king captures, there's f4, and now queen c2 is coming in. So this is just going to be devastating. Queen d3 is probably even more accurate. So let's say bishop takes f4 here, there's queen c2, and then the king runs out, and now all of a sudden this is a king hunt, right? Because the king is on g3 and this king is about to get devastated. So a lot of people, when they're calculating, they do something like this. Okay, I do this, they do that, I do this, and that's it. My position is fantastic. But the thing is, they don't look at, okay, I do this, but what do they have that's the most problematic for me? What if they don't do this? What if they do something else? What if they do this? And as it turns out, if they do this, bishop d5, you're actually in a lot of trouble. So don't try to prove yourself right. Don't be too optimistic about your position. Try to be more realistic and try to prove yourself wrong instead of trying to prove yourself right. So think to yourself, okay, what are the reasons why I should not take this pawn? If I take this pawn, what can black do to not just attack my queen, but also how can black attack my king as well? And then all of these resources such as bishop d5 will come to you. Even a move like bishop to c4. This is also very good because let's say rook to e1 is played, moving the rook. Now bishop d5 is even stronger because if you play f3, there's captures. If you play g3, now there's a very simple queen to g4 and then queen f3 is coming. And this is just simply going to be game over within the next couple of moves. So try to prove yourself wrong instead of proving yourself right. And always look at opponent's resources. Just because one line is good for you, just because this one singular line right here is good for you, does not mean that every line is going to be good for you. So keep this in mind and always be objective in your calculations and don't be lazy. Always look for these sorts of ideas. Always look for the best resources for your opponent, the most sort of vicious resources, right? Because this bishop d5 is a very vicious move. You're just going for the king rather than going for the queen. You're actually sacrificing the pawn as black in order to go for a mating attack. So try to prove yourself wrong instead of being overly optimistic. Next up is look for zwischenzugs, or what's called in-between moves. So in this position, black takes on e4, white takes back with the pawn, and now black has a decision to make. So the bishop is under attack. You can retreat the bishop, you can go somewhere else, but what black chose to do in this position instead is that black chose to take this pawn on e4 with the knight in view of the fact that the bishops have opened up here and he has tactical opportunities in order to win this bishop on h4. So whenever you're in a situation like this where it's really complicated, right? Because there's a lot of tension, there's tension over here, everything is looking at everything, everything is looking at everything over here as well. And it is just a very difficult position because there are so many things that are going on at once. And what you need to look for in positions like this are what's called zwischenzugs, so in between moves. So for example, if you were to capture this knight with your knight, this is actually an incorrect decision because black can just simply capture. And now the problem is that if you capture this bishop on e7 right here, because your bishop is hanging, instead of capturing the bishop on e7, what black will do is actually black will go for a zwischenzug and black will capture on d3 instead. And this is going to lead to equality within the next couple of moves. Let's say captures here. There's going to be queen e7, knight g3, and then either kingside castles or queenside castles. Well, queenside castles is better according to the computer. And now this position is completely equal. So going back, there is a zwischenzug here if you capture it with the knight. If you capture it with the bishop, or sorry, if black captures the pawn on e4 with the bishop, now if you take it with the bishop, there's once again a zwischenzug of knight to c3 in a lot of positions. This line is a little bit more complicated because after bishop takes e7, you need to be very careful. You can't just simply take on c3, you actually have to take back here. And after knight to g3, now you have to take on c3 because that's a tempo on the queen, and that way you are able to keep a slightly worse position for black, but it could have been much worse. So you had better options with the white pieces. But now I'm going to teach you sort of a trick, or not really a trick, it's more of like a tactic that works in a lot of these really complicated positions here. And you need to always scan for in-between moves for your opponent. For example, if your opponent captures this pawn on e4 with the bishop, you actually want to capture this with the knight. The reason why you want to capture it with the knight is because if they take with the knight, then they don't have any more in-between moves. They can't capture on c3 anymore because you took with the knight. So this way, they don't have any zwischenzugs. But if you go back, and if they take with the knight instead, now taking with the knight is bad because there's this zwischenzug. Instead here, you want to take it with the bishop, because after the bishop takes back, there's no more zwischenzug. There's no more bishop takes d3 for the black pieces. So in this case, you just simply capture this bishop right here, and what black will do is just simply capture back, and now you can go knight g3, and you know, black has several options, but all of them lose. For example, if you go bishop to d5, there's simply knight d5 and then rook e1, winning the queen. So always look for your opponent's zwischenzugs, especially in these like ultra complicated positions. Look for, okay, am I giving my opponent an opportunity to play an in-between move? And if you capture this knight with your bishop, since the bishop is the one that you traded off, there's no more bishop on d3, there are no more opportunities for an in-between move anymore. So now you're avoiding all of the zwischenzugs by your opponent, and the same goes if they take it with the bishop right away, because in this case, you want to take it with the knight. Why? Because the knight cannot take anything else here, and there are no more zwischenzugs for black once again, and in this case, you're simply going to win because of bishop takes e7, and let's say queen e7, you're simply gonna go knight to g3. You don't even want to take this right away. We just want to increase your pressure. Black is silly enough to capture this knight on g3. You're not taking this knight. Once again, be very careful. This is not checkers. Just because they took your knight doesn't mean that you have to take back. Who says that we have to take this knight? We can go rook to e1 instead. This is another example of an in-between move. Before we take this knight, we want to go rook to e1. And now, even if the black knight retreats, let's say to h5, it doesn't matter because we're winning the queen. And of course, this is much more value. Actually, the queen covers h5 as well. So this is just completely lost because you're going to lose the knight anyways. All of the squares are covered here by the bishop and the queen. So before we take this knight, we need to play another zwischenzug. And this is very, very nice for the white pieces. So make sure you always scan the position for in-between moves. Just because somebody captures your piece doesn't mean that you have to take back. When they capture, you have a whole tempo to decide what you want to do, and always make sure you take away your opponent's opportunities for a zwischenzug, because in this case, if you take it with the bishop, there's no zwischenzugs. If you take it with the knight, there are in-between moves. So always make sure to take away your opponent's options. So the next very important tip that I want to give you is to stop playing hope chess. And this is such a big mistake that I see a lot of beginners, even intermediate, even advanced players, man, they make this mistake a lot. They play so much hope chess that it's incredible. So basically, in this position, a lot of players would be tempted to play a move like e5. Now, why is e5 such a bad move? Doesn't it open up the queen's path to this pawn on b7? Because right now, the rook is attacking the pawn, the queen is also attacking the pawn. Black can play this move b6 though. So the thing is, yes, you attacked the pawn on b7, yes, you threatened checkmate. However, now you don't have anything else anymore. You just threatened checkmate, black defended it, and now you're left with nothing. And not only you're left with nothing, you blocked your bishop. You blocked your very nice bishop that's on h2. This bishop is very useful on this square. It can go to e5 to be centralized and attack everybody. This bishop is a very nice piece. And a move like e5, it's a positional abomination. This is a terrible move because it blocks your bishop out and it completely kills the activity of one of your most powerful and the most active pieces in this position. So you never want to play moves like e5, because even though it's a one move attacking move, black just defends it, and all of a sudden you've made your position worse because you pushed this pawn from e4 to e5, you blocked in your bishop, and your position has gotten worse because of that. So you never want to do something like this. Instead, in this position, you can do many different things. You can go bishop to e5, you can hit the rook, centralize this rook, and then you can play d4, and then you can transfer the queen to b3 if you want to. Like, let's say rook to f7, right? For example, you can go to d3, you can go to b3. All of these are valid options, but in this way, you still threaten checkmate when you play queen b3, but you keep your bishop open, so you don't kill the activity of your bishop, and from here the game continues. You can go a4, a5, you can go c4, c5, and the attack continues from here. It's still a complicated position because white king is also a little bit questionable here. You do have to be very, very careful. However, it is a winning position for the white pieces objectively if you are very, very precise. So stop playing hope chess. Let me go all the way back to the beginning. Stop playing hope chess and stop making your pieces worse because you're playing hope chess. So keep that in mind. Next up, I want to talk about another very important concept that a lot of players don't understand. Calculation is nothing without evaluation. So if you want to be a strong calculator in chess, you need to have the ability to evaluate in addition to that. Just calculation is not enough. Just evaluation is not enough either. You need both of them. So you need to be able to calculate and you need to be able to evaluate the position as well. So for example, in this position, you can calculate this sequence. You can calculate d takes c4 and then b takes c4 and then bishop to a6 hitting the pawn, rook a to c1, and then let's say rook f to d8, for example. You can easily calculate this sequence right here. It's not a difficult sequence to calculate. All of the moves are pretty simple. But now you need to evaluate the position. So what's going on here? You have to appropriately analyze, okay, so what's the activity of my bishop? Is my bishop better than my opponent's knight? Are my rooks better than my opponent's counterparts? So would this be a better position for the black pieces? It's not. It's about equal. Computers suggest that it's slightly better for the white pieces after rook to e3, which is a little bit difficult for me to understand because it seems to me that this position is just equal. I don't see how white would be better. Apparently computer finds rook a3 and it's gonna think that this pressure down the a file is really, really strong for white. So white is slightly better because of that reason. But going back, let's say you calculate out a different sequence. Let's say you try to play a different move order. Let's say you start with bishop to a6 instead of starting with d takes c4. Now you get a whole different sequence. You get, let's say, c5 here. And after a move like c5, okay, let's say you calculate rook to b8, a very natural move. And now white plays this move knight to d4. And after knight to d4, you realize that, okay, I can defend this pawn. However, this position, even though the material is equal, it's actually much worse for the black pieces. Now white gets this powerful knight on d4, pressuring c6 forever. And this is just going to be a nightmare scenario for the black pieces, because in reality, like, what do you do here? There's not a lot of options that you can go for, and white will in the future start advancing these pawns. Not immediately, because you can't advance them immediately, you're gonna lose them, but in the future that's what white will do, because that's where he can create a passed pawn. But you need to have the ability to look at this position and determine that this position is much worse for black, and then you need to be able to determine that this position is about equalish. I understand that this is not a simple concept. You can't just magically learn this in one day, because positional evaluation it's a difficult skill to have. I have a whole video on it on this channel. It's actually one of my best videos. I recommend you go watch it, but try to formulate your ideas on why each position is better for white or black. And even if it's wrong, well, you can always go back and fix it in the future, but work on your evaluation skill as well. Because if you can calculate 15 moves deep, but you cannot evaluate the position appropriately, then you're simply not going to get better, because calculation and evaluation go together. These are the two skills that you need to use simultaneously. Another very important concept that you need to understand is that not every position requires you to calculate a lot of moves in advance. It really depends on the position. So for example, this is the position that I've brought you today. You have a couple of different options with the black pieces. You can play rook a to b8. You can play a5 to go b4. You can play knight a5 to go knight c4. So what I'm trying to say is that you have multiple options as the black pieces, and white has multiple options in response to your multiple options. So in these types of positions, you can't really calculate like 8, 9, 10 moves ahead, because there's just too many options, and first of all, you don't have time, and secondly, nobody wants to calculate that much. Let's be real, because a lot of your calculation is not really going to be that useful. You don't need to calculate every individual move. If you go a5, you don't need to calculate rook b1, rook c1, rook d1 individually, because it makes no sense to do that. Now, in these types of positions, you need to know the correct plans, correct ideas, and you need to execute them, and you need to start calculating when it's a critical moment. So for example, let's say a5 and opponent plays like rook to c1, for example, you play b4, and let's say opponent goes a takes b4, a takes b4, and they play c4. So in this position, now you need to start calculating precisely, because it is a very tense moment, because a couple of moves ago, this position right here, you have lots of different options, but within the span of like about 4 moves, there's a lot more tension now. There's a lot more going on all of a sudden. So now you need to start calculating more and more precisely. You need to start determining what's going on. Okay, do I take? Do I not take? Do I go here? Do I try to double up on the A file? So what do I do? And then you need to evaluate those positions as well. And in this case, the best thing to do is actually to take, because after queen takes on c4, this is an isolated pawn now. And also this square is kind of weak. You can occupy it with the knight. So for example, knight e7, hitting the queen. Let's say queen goes to either b3 or d3. Let's say, okay, b3, for example. You can put this knight on f5, or you can put it on d5, or you can do a couple of different things. But once the position got very complicated, okay, now you start calculating ultra precisely. But all the way back here, you don't need to calculate like 10 moves ahead. You need to understand the plan, and you need to understand your opponent's resources as well. Now, if you had a position where you had to calculate a sequence of like only moves, so for example, I play an only move and you have one good move in response to that, and then I have one good move in response to that, and so on. In that case, you need to calculate far. But in situations like these, you don't need to calculate that far. What you need to do is you need to understand the positional ideas. But once the position gets really sharp, once there is a critical moment, okay, now we start calculating, and now we start coming up with all of these interesting ideas. So that is another concept that I want you to keep in mind. But other than that, just practice, practice, practice. Calculate every position basically religiously. Just calculate as much as possible, because that's how you get better at calculation. It's by calculating. I wish I could give you a better answer as a coach in order to improve your calculation. And I tell this to my students all the time. I can teach you all the positional details about a specific position. I can give you all the maneuvers. I can give you all the ideas. But the one thing I can't do for you as a coach is I can't calculate for you. That's something that you have to do on your own. So make sure you practice it as much as humanly possible.